Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Going to Attic Space. My name is Jason Boning, and I'm the owner of Uni-Serve Air Conditioning in Houston, Texas, where we maintain, repair, and replace air conditioning systems. The question we have today is, should I upsize my AC system? In other words, should you put a bigger unit on your home? So let's say you have a 3-ton system. Should you go to a 3.5 or a 4? Or if you have a 4-ton system, should you go to a 5? So on and so forth, right? So right off the bat, I would say the short answer is no. That's usually what I tell people is no. There's several things we got to think through and look at first, okay? And especially here in the greater Houston area. And the main reason why is due to the amount of moisture or humidity that we have in the air. And so obviously cooling your home is a huge objective that your AC system has, but also dehumidifying your home is also another task that it needs to perform. Now, air conditioning systems in and of themselves are not dehumidifiers, but they do dehumidify as they cool your home. And in order to do that, the systems must run for a decent amount of time. In other words, it can't kick on, blast a bunch of cold air, and then shut off. If it only runs for, say, 5 minutes at a time, it's not going to have time to circulate that air through the system and remove a lot of moisture. So what we do here at Uni-Serve Air Conditioning is we first start with a load calculation, or run a heat load, if you will. But essentially what we got to do is we got to calculate what the cooling capacity needed for your home is. And so your home has walls, windows, a roof. It's oriented a certain direction. It's located in a certain part of town. It's got a certain amount of shade from trees and so on and so forth. And so those are all things that we got to look at to determine how is the sun shining on it? How is heat being transferred through the walls or through the windows or through the roof? And then how much cooling capacity do we need to remove that heat from your home? Additionally in that is, how much moisture is being picked up in the home? Do you live there by yourself? Do you have a family of 10 people, right? And so the more people you have, the more moisture that's created, the more, so on and so forth. But there's a lot involved in that, okay? And so those are all things that we have to take into account. So once we calculate that, then we're able to size the system properly. Another thing that we got to take into consideration, though, is what is the size of the ductwork that's already in your home. Now, if you have a single-story home, then we can replace the ductwork. We can redesign it and redo it. If you have a 2-story home or even a 3-story townhome or something like that, there's so much ductwork inside the walls that most people don't want to pay to rip out their walls and replace all that, right? They're just like, we just got to use what's there. And that's totally understandable. And so we have to look at that ductwork, talk to you, see if you want to look at redesigning and redoing the ductwork. And then we take all those things into consideration for us to get the correct system size in your home. Now, let's just talk about it let me give you an analogy to kind of help think through it. So I like to think of it, an AC system in terms of how our bodies work. So we have a heart that pumps blood through our body. We have lungs where we breathe in air and then oxygen is transferred to the blood. And it's similar to how an AC system works in that there's a compressor that pumps refrigerant through the system. So you can kind of think of that like the blood. And then there's air that's circulating through the home as well. And the kind of that meetup point, if you will, there's no cross-contamination, if you will, but the refrigerant flows through the evaporator coil and then the air blows across that evaporator coil. So it's a heat exchanger. There's a lot taking place there. And those two things have to match up so that the right amount of heat is transferred from the air to the refrigerant. So that refrigerant has to completely evaporate in the evaporator coil before it goes back to the compressor. So we need the right amount of refrigerant flowing and the right amount of air blowing across that evaporator coil. And so another way to think about it with our body is if you, say you go out for a run. So I know that when I go out for a run, I start breathing a lot heavier. I need a lot more air coming in. And so if you were to restrict your airflow for, whatever means, you cover up your mouth, cover up your nose, and restrict that airflow, you're going to start to struggle, right? And so kind of the same thing with your AC system. If you restrict that airflow, whether that be, usually it's like filters or something, but in terms of like upsizing that unit, if we upsize it, we're going to need a lot more airflow coming across it. And if our ductwork cannot support that additional airflow, then we're going to have problems and we're going to start starving that system, right? It's going to need a lot more air. And so that's why we can't just say, yeah, let's upsize it. Let's go from a 4-ton to a 5-ton, because we're going to be restricting it from air if that ductwork is not sized like it needs to be. So I know that's a lot just to say, yeah, you really shouldn't just upsize your unit. Now, I grew up out in West Texas where it's a lot drier climate. And in that type of climate, you can get away with your system being upsized a little bit more because you're not too concerned about moisture. But there's still the whole ductwork and airflow considerations that have to be taken into account. In the greater Houston area, we got to look at the ductwork, but then we also really got to think about that moisture. And so personally, and just my philosophy is that we actually want to air a little bit on the lower side of things as opposed to being on the higher side, because we'd rather that system have to run longer and remove more moisture than being a little bit more oversized. And actually the longer it runs, the better it is for the compressor and those motors. So the more that they have to turn on and off, on and off, on and off, it's just it's more wear and tear on that system. And so that's why we'd rather be a little bit on the underside, so that we're just always conditioning that air, removing moisture, and keeping your home as comfortable as possible.